to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host, Justin Baker, joining me in studio as 3 series have finally come to an end after an exciting comeback down 3-1. The same story across the board. The team up 3-1 takes the series in 7 games. The Dallas Stars, eliminate the Colorado Avalanche, the Vancouver Canucks downed by the Vegas Golden Knights, and of course the Islanders move on to the conference finals for the first time since 1993 by defeating the Philadelphia Flyers. 1993. That's a long time to not go to the conference finals.
Yeah.
That's 27 years.
Good on the Islanders.
Wow.
Yeah, I would not. If you had asked me like preseason or even like middle of the season and said, hey, Dallas Stars, Islanders, they're going to go to the conference finals on both sides.
I mean, yeah, we could see a Dallas Stars, New York Islanders Stanley Cup final.
I would never. That would be the most boring series ever, I feel like. The NHL would absolutely hate that.
Yeah, on the flip side, a Tampa-Vegas final is like exactly what most people predicted. Right. I think so. Yeah, we kind of get the... who will go, and we'll talk a little bit about those series in a little bit. But we are going to run down the off-season, I guess an off-season preview for the Colorado Avalanche, the Vancouver Canucks, and the Philadelphia Flyers, as they have all been eliminated. And if you haven't listened to our previous off-season previews for a bunch of these teams who have been eliminated, you can go back, subscribe to the show wherever you're listening, and you can listen to those. So let's start with the most, I guess probably the one team that lost that I think many people had as winning this series, the Colorado Avalanche. Probably the biggest surprise of these 3 teams to lose, albeit the Dallas Stars certainly deserving and good enough to go to the conference finals. But I think Colorado was, I don't know, they were kind of the ball, the bell at the ball. We wanted to see them move on because of who was on their team, and Nathan MacKinnon is absolutely unbelievable. It's sad that he's no longer in the playoffs, but Dallas played the crazy team game, and we find the Avalanche eliminated. And for the second year in a row, they made it the second round last year too, right? Yeah. So second year in a row eliminated in the second round, and now they have to figure out a way to kind of get over that hump. Not a lot in terms of like significant players. There's not a lot where certain guys have to get re-signed. I mean, Nemesnikov's a UFA. He had a nice Game 7. Not a bad series against the Dallas Stars, but I don't think he's a huge priority to bring back as a free agent. But the rest of the team is for the most part locked up, other than Landeskog, who's got 1 year left on his deal, is going to be looking for an extension, and chances are he's going to want
a raise,
a pretty good raise.
I don't know about good. You might get close to 7. Yeah.
So what do you think this team needs to do in order to kind of get over this hump?
I think, honestly, there's 2 key areas, and one that affected them the most. Obviously, we know they had a lot of injuries, right, going into this.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah, it happens, right? But I think it kind of exposed some weaknesses and exposed their youth a little bit, right? And so when I look at the biggest need for me is finding a guy on the back end, and maybe you look at a veteran guy, an older guy, maybe a guy you can put in your 5, 6, 7 spot, but a guy who is more of like a defenseman's defenseman, and not necessarily an offensive guy, because they have a lot of those guys on this team already with Makar, Bowen, these young kids that are coming in that can play that already, that can move their feet and skate. But, when Eric Johnson went out and got injured, They were exposed on the penalty kill. They were exposed to, like, for instance, Cale Makar, who partners with him quite often, his run and gun sort of style, his up and down the ice, Dallas kind of took advantage of because there was nobody back there to cover for him.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the biggest area of need that I would like to see them focus on this offseason. And then the second for me is maybe finding, a backup goaltender, a veteran, a guy who has in the past been a starter, but maybe can take on a bigger workload if, for instance, Grubauer gets injured, or should they, have to go 3 goalies deep in the playoff again.
Sure.
They can find a guy that can handle that.
And it was funny going into that Game 7, my thought was, this has to be the end of the Hutchinson domination, and it certainly was.
Yes.
Yeah. The one player who, there's a couple things that this Avs team needs to do probably this offseason. At least they're going to start the conversations. They have to re-sign Landeskog, and maybe even more so, they have to re-sign Cale Makar. And this is his last year of his RFA in this upcoming season. My expectation is that, he's going to get Thomas Chabot type of numbers, like $8 million for per season for the next 7 years. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
For Cale Makar, and with the cap taking a little bit of a hiatus of increasing, that I think that number is probably right on. Like you're not going to pay him $6 or anything. Like
no.
You can't. So I would think that they're going to be looking at that contract as like, he got 44 points this year, Thomas Chabot, and Cale Makar is likely going to win Rookie of the Year. 50 points in 57 games. He had broke records in the playoffs for rookie defenseman, and getting assists. Him and Quinn Hughes just both going at it. So I don't see how basically a point per game defenseman isn't going to get at least $8 million.
Yeah, I mean, look, you've got...
he's a rookie.
Right.
Like
he's only getting better.
What happens if... maybe next year, maybe signing him at $8 million is a deal. Like, you want to get him signed to $8 million as quick as possible.
Oh, I think so. They would...
What if he goes and gets 90 points next year?
Well, I don't see that, but it's
he's
not
going
out of the realm of
a point per game.
Yeah.
If he goes a point per game and slightly above it, if a defenseman gets 80 points, he's getting $10 million.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, look, Erik Karlsson, right? He cashed in on it, $11 million. Yeah. But I think if you're Cale Makar, right? First off, you can look at Sam Girard's deal. He's getting $5 million. So you're like, okay, this guy doesn't produce the way I do. He wasn't relied upon to be your number one like I was. So clearly you've got leverage right there.
He's 22 years old.
Right. But I think more if the smarter play, if you're Cale Makar, is to take a 3-year deal, 4-year deal at most, still go into RFA status, and then you can bank on the next one, and you can get that $11 million because that flat cap will be gone. Hopefully the NHL will be increasing the cap. So
that's a good point. Yeah, and then you could keep it down. You could probably sign him for $6 million if
they're lucky.
6 or 7 for those 3 years.
Yeah, I would say $7 million would probably be a good way to, because again, Colorado can fire back too and be like, listen, this was 1 year. We haven't seen the consistency. We haven't seen multiple years of doing this.
But he does have next year. He could just play and not sign a contract.
He could.
But why? If somebody's going to hand you $8 million,
well, if he gets injured or has a shitty year,
you don't want to risk that. So you just take
right.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say about this team was, they tried to address that lack of depth throughout their lineup, bringing in Kadri, bringing in Donskoy. Donskoy to a lesser, he didn't, to me, make a huge impact to this team. And Kadri certainly did. I think that, if he can stay healthy all year long, he's in a pretty good spot to be able to do well. 3 goals in the 9 playoff games this year. But, Donskoy had 3 goals. I was like, Kadri had more than 3 goals.
Yes.
Looking at Donskoy. 9 goals, in the 15 games, more than a point per game. He was fantastic. I think this team needs to find some depth somewhere, and I know that they've got several young, really nice players coming up. But you're looking at Cale Makar. He's already up here. You have to kind of fill out the rest of this roster. It doesn't seem as though Colorado has those guys coming on the offensive side, on the forward side, coming in to kind of fill out the rest of the lineup. And that, to me, is going to be the most interesting thing for the Avalanche. Of course, Bowen Byram might come up next year, and that would certainly make up for the loss of some of these lower-tier defensemen like a Barbario and a Connaughton. I don't think you need to bring them back if Byram's stepping into the lineup.
I'm getting rid of them either way anyways.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
Look, there's a reason why, and I keep hearing this name come up, and I would be interested to see, especially because he had, I don't necessarily want to say a down year, but it wasn't as productive as his Hart Trophy season, but Taylor Hall's name keeps popping up. And if you can maybe get that guy, say, maybe even $7 million, luckily, if they could somehow convince him to take a couple bucks less to be like, hey, you're on a team that's going to compete
and win
for a long time.
Wow.
What a steal that would be.
Kadri would be drooling.
Right. Absolutely. You finally have a complimentary winger.
Yeah.
Now you have Rantanen on one line and Landeskog and, Hall on another. Like, that's disgusting.
Yeah. The other side of it is the Avalanche going to take advantage of kind of the glutton of goalies available right now? Will they look to make a move with Grubauer becoming a UFA at the end of next year? Pavel Francouz, you could move him easily.
That's the play to me, is move him. Yeah. I say find a team that wants a backup goaltender, move him, maybe to like Ottawa or something.
And they've got the cap space to be able to bring in anyone.
I would maybe target a Thomas Greiss if I was Colorado. Try to get him on your books.
That'd be a great move.
$3-4 million a season for
Islanders
like 3 years.
Steal your goalie and you steal theirs.
Right.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah, or maybe look to the New York Rangers and be like, hey, Mr. Georgiev, you want to come over here and play?
I just don't. I mean, the way that the Islanders do think, I think that they'll probably try to re-sign Greiss.
Oh, I'm sure they want to. Sure. Yeah. Especially after his Game 7.
Yeah, fantastic Game 7. Yeah, a genius move to go to him. All right, well, the Avalanche have a little bit of work to do. I do think that some of it is like, let Makar improve just because that's what happens when you're freaking 21 years old. You get a little bit better. Let Bowen Byram step into the lineup. And you don't want to waste these McKinnon years, though.
No, that's the thing.
You do have quite a bit of time, but you've got McKinnon at 6.3 for another 3 years, and once that's over, McKinnon will be 28 years old, and assuming he's still going the way he's going right now, he's going to get $15 million.
Yeah, depending on where the cap goes.
Assuming the cap goes up, he's going to get. Connor McDavid's at 12.5. He's going to get more than that in a UFA year.
Regardless, even if the cap doesn't really move much, or if it stays flat, even at like that fourth year there, he's still got a good argument to get Connor McDavid money.
Yeah, at least.
Very good argument.
At least. Yeah, McDavid's got another 6 years left on his deal. So that'll be at 12.5. You're going to look at that and you're going to go, all right, he's more than halfway through his deal at 12.5, and I've been just as good.
Absolutely.
I'm getting more.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys that put
at least
McKinnon
close.
Right up there, with McDavid. So,
all right. Well, let's move on to the Vancouver Canucks. Probably the most unexpected team to have gone this far, especially considering their highest paid player is Louis Eriksson.
Oh boy!
Surprisingly enough, I don't know if it's easy to forget that Louis Eriksson is still going to be on the Canucks, making $6 million a year for another 2 seasons. Still, he's 37 years old.
Yeah, I wonder what the buyout would be at this point on that contract. But if they could save a few $1 million, it might be the time to do it.
Save probably about $3 million a year, but then you get extra years knocked on there. So I don't.
But by the time those extra years roll around, you're hoping that the cap goes up, right?
Yeah, they've got $17 million in cap space. They of course have to. I guess they don't really need to figure out their goaltending situation anymore. I don't know why you'd be hesitant about going to Thatcher Demko. He was fantastic in those games.
That's the only reason they went 7 games. Yeah. The only reason they won 3 games in that series was goaltending. Markstrom obviously had the one amazing game, but now if you're Markstrom too, right, your leverage went down big time because Vancouver's like, okay, cool, we got this kid who just proved he can bring it in the playoffs. Yeah,
at least staying in Vancouver. I think Markstrom probably is, he's not going to take less than 4.5, 5.
Oh, no, he'll get more than that.
So he's going to go on the open market and you go make your money somewhere, which is, I'm sure, what he'll do. But then you have to decide, Michael DiPietro, do we want to do a 1A, 1B and see how he does as a backup? Or are you going and, trying to pull in or just re-signing like a Louis Domingue or, somebody who you can play alongside Thatcher Demko? I don't know if Demko is ready to play 60 games. I don't think you even want to get him there anymore. That's just not how the NHL really works. You don't see too many successful teams with goalies who play just a ridiculous amount of games. So that is the biggest question mark for the Vancouver Canucks.
No, absolutely. I think if you decided now that maybe maybe negotiations, and you're like, okay, Markstrom has sort of priced himself out to where we want or where we feel comfortable, especially because he is 30, right? If he wants 8 years, I'm definitely not giving him 8 years.
No, you don't give any goalie 8 years.
No, absolutely not.
Unless you're Carey Price.
Right. But I think if you do decide to move on from him, I think, like you mentioned, bringing in a guy who has experience being, a starter, who is a veteran guy, and like one name I look at is Cam Talbot, who I think would be a great addition. Showed he could bring into the playoffs this year too with Calgary, and he's a guy who can still, is capable of playing 30, 40 games.
He's been on every other Canadian team in the Pacific Division. Why not? Why not bring him?
Just stay.
Yeah. The other two big question marks: are they going to bring back Chris Tanev, who's been an important part of that top four, and a right-handed shot defenseman, which is. They're hard to come by, and he's already making $4.45 million. He's probably due for a small raise. And then you also have to decide what you want to do with Tyler Toffoli. And Toffoli was really effective in the playoffs. He played very well for the Canucks in the regular season. Like, he just seemed to fit there.
Yeah, he complements those top two lines very well, whichever pair.
Very well. And I mean, I don't think you're looking more than 4 or 5 years ahead for a guy like Tyler Toffoli, just based on the way that he plays. But I think you can get him for about around the amount that he was previously signed for.
Yeah,
maybe with a small raise, $5 million for 5 times 5 or something like that would be.
I would be okay at 5.5 with that guy right now. Assuming that he doesn't want a lot of term, right? Because obviously at 28, I'm not giving him more than 4 or 5 years at most.
Well, just because of the way he plays.
Sure.
Like, if he were a more finesse guy, you wouldn't have a problem with it. But because he's, a little throws his body around a little bit more, you're not. I would be concerned as to how well he would do. But when you look at what he's been able to do the last few years, you got to put it all into perspective. You can't just go, all right, 10 games in the regular season, he had 10 points. That's great. 7 games in the playoffs, 4 points. Pretty solid. But you look back what he did with LA, and I know LA plays a little bit different of a game, but he was still about a 40-point guy in the regular season, maybe 45. So you don't want to necessarily pay him 5.5 for, who knows, maybe 40 points. And maybe this is kind of a thing where he says, well, I'm going to take a flyer on myself, and I'll sign for 1 year at $5 million and see if I can't get more if I have a really good season this next year. But I think he's probably a guy who will go for some term.
Sure, yeah. And then, I mean, when you talk about the back end too, right? Tanev, I really like him. I loved his game for Vancouver. It fit very, very well. Like you talked about, right-handed D. But I think right now, if you're Vancouver, the priority is getting Quinn Hughes to an extension, because I think that'll dictate what a guy like Tanev can get. And what I mean by that is not necessarily what Tanev's going to be asking for, but what Vancouver's willing to spend on him. Because obviously, if Quinn Hughes is going to cost you $8 million, you've got obviously Tyler Myers signed at $6 million for a few more years, and he's really the only defenseman signed, past next season. So, again, I would be okay with giving Tanev, $5 million, give him that small raise, because, again, how important he was to your top four. But the term, right? Maybe, I only gave him 3 years because, we're, again, with the flat cap, it's a little bit harder to, really determine where it's going to be, in 3-4 years from now. So,
yeah, I don't know how much of a raise he really gets. Yeah. At 4.4, he's a defensive defenseman. I mean, he's not going to score more than a couple goals and pick up 15-ish assists. He's a 20-point guy for the most part.
Sure.
Don't see him really exceeding that. I mean, he had 20 points this last year, but before that's his best since 14-15. So he's not someone you're relying on to get big points. So I don't think he'll command a lot of money. But yeah, if you go 3 times 5 or 4 times 5, I think that's somewhat reasonable for him. But and also when you're looking at a guy who doesn't put up a lot of points, you're not going to see as big of a decline because you're not worried about that part of his game. So you don't need to worry about how efficient he is in the offensive zone. You just want him to be able to keep his good positioning, his ability to block shots, and just make that first pass out of the zone, which he's okay at.
Yeah.
All right. any other big things you see the Canucks do? I mean, they still got to sign Jake Virtanen and Tyler Mott. They've got a few RFAs that they'll have to throw some money at. They do have $17 million in cap space. So.
Yeah, I think they'll get most of these guys signed, no problem. But more importantly for the Canucks, for me, it's all about just letting a lot of these young guys grow. You know, that experience was invaluable to them, and I think it's just only going to make them better for the next couple years.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Quinn Hughes is only going to get better, and we'll see what the rest of this team can do. My guess is they'll try to trade away Sven Barchi, who they buried in the minors again. That guy just can't seem to figure out his life. And remember, they also have Olli Juolevi, who was the first round pick for them several years ago, and he hasn't been able to crack the lineup. But he had a pretty good season in the AHL leading up to this, and so I think Olli Juolevi maybe has a chance to make this roster next year, which would be huge, given a couple of these guys that may walk.
Sure,
especially if Tanev walks.
Yeah,
then you're in a much better place. All right, last but not least, the Philadelphia Flyers. Probably, the team to surprise us the most they were the number one seed in these playoffs for the Eastern Conference. And I want to start with Claude Giroux because I think he probably took the biggest step backwards this year. We saw his drift as a center. He moves to the wing. He has that 102-point season, an 85-point season. This last year, just 53 points in 69 games. In the playoffs, only one goal in those 16 games. He was playing on the third line at times. And that is, to me, the biggest question for this Flyers team at $8.275 million. What do you do with Claude Giroux?
You can't do anything with him but keep him.
2 years left on his deal.
I don't think anybody's going to take a flyer on a guy like that at that price.
If you ate $3 million of it?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably
$5 million for Claude Giroux? Would you take Claude Giroux for $5 million?
Yeah, I probably would. Yeah, I probably would. But
would you take him for $6 million? I'd take him for
probably.
$6 million.
Yeah.
So I think that he certainly has some value.
But I don't think you're going to get fair market return if you're Philly. So is it worth getting rid of him at that point?
Can he have another resurgence, though?
Yeah, I think
that's the question. I think he already had it.
Yeah, to me, I want to see him back at center. And whether or not that means he is playing third-line center minutes or if he's back on second-line center, maybe you move Kevin Hayes down to the third line. But to me, when I watch his game, right, when he's engaged, when he's mentally, physically engaged, and again, it's been 8-9 years since we saw him with those series against Sidney Crosby where he was really physically engaged, and he had the offensive production to go with it. But even just a couple of years ago, when he was still playing center and engaged, he was far more productive in my mind than he was on the wing, because sometimes he just looks like he's just out there going through the motions. And I don't think until about halfway through the series we start to see him try to get a little bit more engaged, a little bit more, back to the old Claude Giroux. Yeah. But, again, too little, too late. And if you're paying a guy $8 million and you're only getting a point every other game, it's
very hard to beat terrible. The Islanders 3 times in a row.
Right, yeah. And that same goes for another guy who's making a ton of money, and that's Jacob Voracek. And I tweeted out too. When I was watching the game last night, and I realized this after Andy Green scored. I looked it up just out of curiosity. Andy Green scored more goals in this series than Jacob Voracek did. That's terrible.
Little unlucky, but yeah.
Sure, yeah, but
Voracek isn't the huge goal scorer.
No, but
he's more the assist guy. But
he's got to produce, at
$8 million.
Yeah. And that's what ultimately did the Flyers in. They just couldn't get their stars to perform on a consistent basis. It seemed like they'd go 1-2 games, especially even against Montreal, where they'd just be hot for 1-2 games, and then they just disappear, and then they'd get lucky and maybe get some production out of Travis Konechny or the random JVR when he finally got in there for a game or two. But
yeah, he just didn't look right, and I would guess that there's something going on with him. Not sure, but.
Yeah, I've already been hearing buyout or trade JVR already after 1 year.
Buyout, he's got $7 million for the next 3 years. I don't know if a buyout's the right direction, but I think you're going to give him another year to kind of figure himself out. I mean, remember last year he had 27 goals in 66 games, and then he got hurt. I mean, he's been okay. His 19 goals in 66 games. Just this playoffs, he just did not. He didn't look right. There's something going on. I don't know what happened.
I hope so.
A lot of times, we find out at the end of all the playoffs, we find out, oh, that guy, he broke a foot, and he was playing on it. So yeah, there's those question marks. I mean, certainly the top end of the Flyers payroll is undeserving of the amount of money that they're making. Like, out of probably any team in the NHL, Van Riemsdyk, Hayes, Voracek, and Giroux are the most overpaid 4 players on any team.
Yeah, and the most underpaid player on any team is Sean Couturier.
That maybe the only other team that can rival that kind of overpayment are the
Detroit Red Wings,
San Jose Sharks.
Oh well, yeah, I'd throw Detroit in there with Franz Nielsen and Justin Abdelkader.
Yeah,
too,
but they're only making $5 million and
producing like 10 points. So,
yeah, that's true.
It's rough too, but I get what you're saying.
And the Wings are so bad though that it almost doesn't matter. Whereas the Flyers are. I mean, imagine if those players were producing, this Flyers team might be the best team in the league.
It could have been good
if those guys are rolling. I mean, it was really a great team effort to get where they did, and Carter Hart shine like crazy. And there's your RFA. You got to re-sign Carter Hart, and there has not been very many young goaltenders to come out of their RFA, their ELC, and look at them and go, that guy deserves a big contract. There aren't very many of them that I can think of.
The big example, and I think Philly's going to use this, looking right across the state at Pittsburgh and saying Matt Murray won 2 cups, and they only gave him like $3-ish or $4 million a season.
Yeah, and I don't think you're going to be able to get away with that.
No, I don't think so
Carter
either.
Hart.
But I think they're going to use that as a negotiation tactic and be like, hey, let's get you in at 5 or 6 for a few years,
and 5 or 6 I think would be fair for a goaltender at. Well, he'll be 23 at that point, but and really in reality he has played in 74 games in the regular season total and 14 in the playoffs, but those 14 games in the playoffs he looked great.
He did.
So okay, so who else on the Flyers? What are you looking for them to do this offseason in terms of like what should they bring in?
I wouldn't mind, again, and mostly
Justin Braun's probably gone.
Yeah, probably gone. I mean, you could go out and get a veteran defenseman type guy, maybe like a Trevor Daley, somebody who you can bring in for $1 or $2 million, give you some reliable minutes on the back end. But I'm also looking at hopefully them bringing in some scoring, because that's what we're ultimately they suffered the most, was their depth on the wings, right? So they had the centers to do it. So you go out and you find yourself,
That's what JVR is supposed to do,
right? I don't know. Maybe if you're not going to go spend money on high end talent, but maybe you go out and you find a guy like a Tyler Ennis, or maybe
Tyler Toffoli would look pretty good on this Flyers team.
Yeah, or maybe you try to go poach Derek Brassard, who just beat you, and ask him to come play too, because he looked pretty dang good in that series. Or maybe you go even a little further and go to Colorado and Nemestikov, and maybe you take a flyer on him and see if he pans out, if he can get another chance. But
yeah, those are good thoughts. The other side of it is they've got we'll say they've got $9 million in cap space. Here's the guys they need to re-sign. They need a goalie. They've got one more year of Carter Hart on his ELC, but Brian Elliott is a UFA, so they're going to have to bring in some goalie, probably for something similar, around $2 million.
Yeah, you can bring Elliott back.
So there's $2 million.
Sure.
So now we're down to 7. Now we've got $7 million, and you need to re-sign Robert Hagg and Philip Myers, Nolan Patrick. Nolan Patrick hasn't been great. I think you're probably going to give him
$3 million, 2 maybe.
Yeah, he is probably the weirdest contract, right?
Right.
He's almost like Sam Bennett in Calgary. Like, he just never panned out. He's like been a 30-point guy, and that's kind of is that where he's going to stay, or is he going to get better? I mean, at 30 points a year, that's probably about right. $3 million. You're probably just trying to sign a bridge deal, $3 million for 2 years, maybe 3. No, you're going with 2 years. $3 million for 2 years, I think, is probably what you're looking for.
Sure. Yeah.
And then see if you can't have some 50-point seasons and become a $5 million guy or something. But and then at the same time, so you got all 3 of those guys. And you have to find another defenseman. Probably. Like, you're going to lose Justin Bronze, and you got to figure out something on that side. Now, you do have Morgan Frost coming up through the pipeline, who looks like he'll be pretty good.
He could be a player, yeah.
So those are the biggest things, is that the Flyers really don't have much wiggle room at all.
No, and that's so another one I was thinking of too, and maybe a good way to get you $1 million and a half bucks in savings is flipping JVR for another bad contract, right? Like a Neil Lucic kind of thing. And you look at, and one place I looked at was
but
Nashville
is it
Predators.
Really that bad of a contract?
I don't know. Well, yeah, I think it's a bad contract, but
27 and 19, he's got 46 goals. I mean, in the 2 years that he's been there.
But I think maybe you need a shakeup. You need something to stir the pot. And so maybe I look at a team like Nashville who could use another stirrup as well. And so maybe you say, hey, let's flip Turris for JVR, right? Because Nashville wouldn't mind.
You think that JVR is on the same level as Kyle Turris? Because I don't.
Oh, I don't think so at all. But I think Kyle Turris he's shown, those flashes that he could still be a decent guy.
He's also got an extra year on his deal.
He does, yeah, absolutely.
On top of him.
But by then, hopefully, again, the cap's a little bit higher. And then now you have a guy to play third-line center minutes and can move up and down the lineup a little bit if needed. Yeah. But maybe that's a short-term solution to a problem for a guy who's making $7 million plus.
Yeah, if you can find somebody who's willing to take it all on, which there's got to be some team, especially maybe teams like an Arizona who is about to kind of lose some.
They're right up against the cap though too. So, oof.
And the other obvious looks are like, can you maybe deal a Scott Lawton? Someone who's deeper down in your lineup at $2.3 million. I know it's not as big of a savings, but you could move someone like that to grab that extra few million that you need to do something else. But yeah, it'll be. It's those guys at the top, and you're not going to move Giroux. He's got a no move clause, so that's probably not going to happen. But Voracek to me is the guy I'm looking at. You want to shake up? Trade Jacob Voracek.
That would be a big shakeup, yeah. That would be.
And then you're relieving yourself of $8.25 million for the next 4 years. Now, are you going to get a Jacob Voracek back? No, absolutely not.
I think you might have to eat a couple $1 million out of that too, but still.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
If you can get a young player that maybe, you can take, a chance on, maybe like, for instance, like an Anthony Duclair, right? A guy that got moved around a lot, didn't really produce as well as most people thought he would. Then he found the right spot, and then all of a sudden he blew up. So maybe you try to find that kind of player.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure every team would love to find that kind of player. That's always ideal. Okay, let's take these 3 teams, and we'll start with the Flyers because we're here right now. What do the Flyers do next year? Like, are they categorize them as far as are they a Stanley Cup contender again? Are they like take a step back, take a step forward? What's your thought?
I see them right a middling team, like a 5-6 type, spot that they're going to compete for, I think, because again, the Metro, what the Penguins maybe do this offseason will kind of dictate that. The Rangers are getting better. Carolina, we're hoping they get better too, and maybe New Jersey can finally get it together in a couple of years. But next year, I think they're going to compete, that 3-4 spot in that division, and ultimately maybe finish in like a 6-7-5 spot.
Okay. All right. So you think they take a step back for the most part?
I don't know if I want to call it a step back, but because
they were the second place team in the division,
right,
ending the season.
Yeah, they were just so hot those last 25 games, and so I think if you stretch it out over the course of the year and maybe what they did before those 25 games, I think that's more realistic of the Flyers team you're going to get next year.
To me, I would say you're going to get a better Van Riemsdyk. Carter Hart's going to get better. Provorov is stepping into becoming one of the best defensemen in the NHL, like a top 15, top 20 defenseman, and Sanheim's getting better. I think you've got enough players who are kind of on the rise for this team that they're going to be right around the same spot. Like they'll be top 3 in that Metro. And frankly, I mean, Pittsburgh really was top 3 in that division. Like that division is so tight. But I would say when I look at the Islanders, I keep going, how is this team not going to, like, this
it's
team,
hard to keep having faith in them.
They aren't going to, I just don't see how they're not going to get worse next year. I don't know. Like those types of teams don't usually last as long. The teams where it's like, wow, that team's just so well coached, and they're almost like Nashville was maybe 5 years ago, where you're like, this team's just so well coached, and which ironically they had Barry Trotz at some point, maybe a little before that, but
right.
But they don't have a lot of star players. They've got nice pieces. They've got guys who can play, and now it's a matter of like, and I guess they have Matthew Barzal, which is a slight step up
and
on
Josh Bailey. You could throw him in there too.
Nashville has, but I mean, Nashville has had Philip Forsberg and PK Subban, who at the time was very good. There are a lot of similarities to me, and it's just a team that doesn't seem super sustainable because you don't have that really high end player that can just ride them for the next 10 years.
Right, take over the game. And yeah, I mean, I see that.
Outside of Barzal, maybe.
Yeah, I see that. But at the same time, too, I look at a team like Philly, right? And they're poised for the future, too, because they've got good goaltending and they've got a great coach.
Yep.
So you have those two things, you can kind of make everything else work. And I mean, look.
Which is why I think that the Flyers are more likely to kind of finish a little higher next year as well. The Vancouver Canucks, I think they might be the most, like, they could improve, but they could also go backwards. That Pacific is a weird one because
outside of Vegas, I don't have a lot of faith in any other team finishing high in that division.
Yeah, I mean, but San Jose could come back next year and win the division.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
and Edmonton could fall back to what they were the year before, and McDavid and Draisaitl could be great, but they could still shit the bed. So.
Sure, absolutely. I think when you look at it from a whole, you look at Calgary. I think Calgary's going to take a step back.
I agree.
Sounds like they might even lose Gaudreau.
I think they're going to shake things up. Yeah, for sure.
And I don't see them moving forward. Arizona, I think that they're right where they are. They're just always going to be that middling team. Anaheim's not going to get a whole lot better. Neither are the Kings. San Jose is the one team that could step forward. I would expect them to be better than 63 points in 70 games.
Yeah, I agree.
But Vancouver, I think they're poised to be top 3 in this division again next year.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Who was the last team? Colorado.
Yeah.
Finished second in their division, and the ceiling is the limit, right? Like,
yeah, I think they only get better. I think they're just going to compete for that number 1 spot in this division because, again, like we looked at the team in front of them, St. Louis, right? They got to deal with Tarasenko's injury. They might have to move some guys. They might not have Peter Angelo back. So we don't really know where they're going to be next year in terms of a roster for the whole season. And assuming that Colorado stays healthy, depending on what they do this offseason in terms of splashing in the free agent market with all that money they have, and maybe if they go out and get another goaltender, they could easily take the top spot in that division.
Yeah, they need to be careful with all that extra money.
Yeah,
because they are in a luxury where they're paying their top guys so little. But you've got one more year left of Landeskog not making much money. One more year left of Makar on his ELC. One more year left of not paying a goalie very much. So I think this next year, it's going to be seen as like this is the year for Colorado because they could bring in anyone they want.
Right.
They could pay Taylor Hall $12 million for 1 year.
You could, yeah. You very well could.
And bring in a guy and just sign him and see what you can do for 1 year. You could do that. You could sign anyone for 1 year. Imagine signing Pietrangelo for a year at $12 million.
That would be sick to pair him with Cale Makar.
Or $10 million for 1 year. Would you do it? Maybe not. But maybe not if you're Pietrangelo. All right. Well, there is our show. And, let's just give quick predictions on these upcoming series.
Okay.
Islanders Islanders and Tampa Bay Lightning. Where do you stand with them?
I mean, Tampa Bay was my Stanley Cup pick, so I'm sticking with them. I don't think it's going to go 7, though. I think it's going to be 5. It's going to be rather short.
Okay. Tampa did all this without Stamkos.
Right, and they might not have Kucherov either, which is another big thing to consider.
Sounds like Stamkos is coming back, but...
Yeah, so it's risky, but I think because if they get into a scoring match, right, I think Tampa's still got the depth to do it, and I still think, because they've got, Barclay, they got those Gaudreau guys that can grind too, and they can play that good defensive system if they need to, and they've got the best goaltender in the playoffs still at this point. So
this Islanders team is like a much better Columbus.
Sure,
really,
yeah,
a better, just as well coached. I'd say Tortorella and Trotz are some of the best in the game. Very, very well coached teams, but the Islanders have much more depth offensively.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
I think the Islanders upset and go to the Stanley Cup final. First time since '83.
Okay.
That's or maybe 84, right? They lost to the Oilers.
Yeah.
84.
I think you're right, but still,
I think the Islanders are going to beat the Lightning.
Okay,
I really do.
That would be crazy because, I mean, look, nobody picked the Islanders or even Dallas to make it this far. So it's crazy the way everything's panned out. And so at this point, 2020 would not shock me at all.
I want to see that.
If Tampa did lose, though, it would make for a fun offseason because I guarantee they would be in for a big shakeup too. So
yeah,
that would be fun.
I can see the way that Dallas can play. And get great goaltending. And we saw what happened with Vegas and Vancouver when Vancouver got great goaltending. It didn't matter what Vegas did. They could take shots from everywhere, and they just could not put a puck in the net for a while. The difference is Dallas has some... they have an ability to score at times. They can make it happen. They have much deeper defense. They're much better... top to bottom, and Radulov looks like an MVP candidate right now. It'll be fun. I think that series is going to be very interesting. I think it'll be more fun than the Tampa Islanders. As much as I want Tampa to win because I think that it's a better final if the offensive team, high octane one, makes it through. But the Islanders, I don't like watching them, but I think they could win. But Dallas, I don't know if they can hold back Vegas when push comes to shove. Vegas has proven that their backs can be up against the wall and they'll still get it done. I mean, you didn't watch that Vancouver series and think Vancouver was ever going to win. Right. Even when Vancouver is winning, you're just like
6 shots through the third period and they're still 0-0. I mean,
it'll be fine. Vegas is going to win. I knew watching that game. Vegas is just going to win. It's too much. You can't give up that kind of offense and expect to win those games.
Yeah, Dallas will make it interesting. I absolutely agree. And it's great because they've been getting scoring depth-wise from places like you wouldn't expect it, right?
Yeah,
Guys would just show up, be amazing. I mean, look, the guy who, I can't remember his name, or how to pronounce it, Kiryanov who came in for Game 7 for Andrew Cogliano, came in, scores a hat trick, right? They get that depth scoring at the time when they need it, and that's why they've been able to go so far. The difference is, I think, Vegas... Their depth, top from bottom, has been producing the way we expected it to, been producing at the rate we wanted it to. And while, Demko was great, and really did a number on them, statistical wise, where they probably could have scored, 4 or 5 goals each game. But those guys still went out and showed up and played their game. They didn't deviate. They still managed to be as effective as you would expect them to be.
The difference is Dallas can actually play defense. Vancouver wasn't playing defense. They just weren't any good against Vegas. They were overwhelmed.
But ultimately, I think because you're not seeing, and maybe this is the time for a guy like Tyler Seguin, these guys to step up their stars who haven't been, dominating games on a consistent basis. If they can do that, they have a shot at beating Vegas. But ultimately, I just think guys like Mark Stone, Pacioretty, they've just been playing too good for too long. Shea Theodore looks like, he could be an MVP candidate at this point, much like Miro Heiskanen has. And then, Robin Leonard could potentially take over a game at any point, too, much like Khudobin can. I mean, he's been phenomenal, too. And who knows, maybe they go to Bishop at some point, too. But, that'll be interesting to see who they go into. Yeah, if Kiviranta turns out to be, like, that was his coming out party and all of a sudden he's good. Because I tend to think that it's just a nice little story and that it won't continue.
Had one goal in the regular season his whole career, and he needs a hat trick in Game 7.
Right.
That's not going to continue. And I don't think that, like, Tyler Seguin with 2 goals in 15 games, he's got 7 points. He's going to be better.
He's going to have to.
He's going to have to. I am very pleasantly surprised with how well Joe Pavelski's been playing.
Yeah,
I think that'll continue. So this series is so tight. It's so tough to call. Man,
I think this one goes 7, personally.
I do too. I think it goes 7 again, and I know who I want to win in terms of watching a great Stanley Cup final. It's Tampa, Vegas. But I do have an affinity for Jim Nill, and I'm just going to be rooting for the Stars.
Okay.
But
yeah, love Jim Nill.
So I guess Stars, Islanders.
Wow.
Weird Stanley Cup final, but then at the same time we could get the 2 big boys in the finals. And I don't know who to pick.
Yeah, whenever
it's such a hard pick.
I know. Whenever I'm stuck, I just look at goaltending, right? Because that's my position. That's what I love. And so whoever I like better in net is ultimately going to be my pick. And because I love Robin Lehner.
And even if Robin Lehner faints, you got another great goalie right behind him. But
I still like Fleury better than...
And will Ben Bishop come back? There's another question. Yeah. It's possible. I know that they're talking about that he might be able to return, but
yeah, we'll see.
Do you go away from Khudobin if he comes back?
No, I think you keep riding Khudobin until he falters.
He's not going to play in Game 1. We know that, but there is a chance that he comes back. So
yeah, Lehner, Khudobin, Game 1. Just keep riding them.
All right. All right, there you have it. We will we'll talk to you guys later in the week. Enjoy Labor Day and all that comes with it. Hopefully my wife will be in labor on Labor Day. That would be
exciting.
That'd be fun. Her due date was yesterday, so tomorrow's Monday, Labor Day. So let's hope it's that. You can find us on Twitter @OTHockeyTalk, and enjoy your holiday weekend.